Hello everyone. Today I am going to give a brief note on the topic burden of proof under Indian Evidence Act 1872. Evidence is the material that establishes a claim or an assertion and enables the court to come to a just decision. Oral or documentary evidence should be produced before the court to prove or disprove respective contention of both the parties. The rule of evidence requires the respective parties to place the best evidence in hand to establish their assertion beyond the reasonable doubt. When a person is bound to prove the existence of any fact, it is said that the burden of proof lies on that person. The underlying principles of the burden of proof are contained in the concept of onus probandi, factum probans. Onus probandi means the burden of proof. Generally, a party who alleges an affirmative position has to prove it. Factum probans is proving the fact. Thus, together it means how to prove facts and who shall prove and to what extent. Chapter 7, Section 101 to Section 114 of Indian Evidence Act deals with the provisions of burden of proof. It is a fundamental principle of criminal jurisprudence that guilt of accused is to be proved by the prosecution and an accused should be presumed to be innocent. The expression burden of proof is explained in Section 101 of Indian Evidence Act as when a person is bound to prove the existence of any fact, it is said that the burden of proof lies on that person. In short, the burden of proof means the obligation to prove a fact. Now, let us discuss the important provisions of Indian Evidence Act relating to burden of proof. According to Section 101, when a person is bound to prove the existence of any fact, it is said that the burden of proof lies on that person. The burden of proof lies on the party who substantially asserts the affirmative of the issue and not upon the party who denies it. This rule of convenience has been adopted in practice because the party on whom burden of proof lies must, in order to succeed, he should establish a prima facie case. He cannot, on failure to do so, take advantage of the weakness of his adversary's case. For example, A desires a court to give judgment that B shall be punished for a crime which A says B has committed. In simple words, A has filed a case against B that B has committed a crime. Here, A must prove that B has committed the crime. According to Section 102, the burden of proof in a suit or proceeding lies on that person who would fail if no evidence at all were given on either side. This section lays down the general test of burden of proof. Accordingly, the burden of proof lies on the party whose case would fail if no evidence were given on either side. For example, A sues B for land of which B is in possession and which, as A asserts, was left to A by the will of C, B's father. If no evidence were given on either side, B would be entitled to retain his possession. Therefore, here the burden of proof is on A. In other words, here A has to prove that the land which is in B's possession belongs to him because it is given to him by the will of C. Section 103 of the Indian Evidence Act provides that the burden of proof as to any particular fact lies on that person who wishes the court to believe in its existence unless it is provided by any law that the proof of that fact shall lie on any particular person. For example, A prosecutes B for theft and wishes the court to believe that B admitted the theft to C. Here, A must prove that B has admitted that he has committed the theft to C. In other words, A must prove the admission by B. On the other hand, B wishes the court to believe that at the time in question, he was elsewhere. This fact has to be proved by B. The burden of proving the plea of alibi is on the accused person. According to section 104, the burden of proving any fact necessary to be proved in order to enable any person to give evidence of any other fact is on the person who wishes to give such evidence. For example, A wishes to prove a dying declaration by B. Here, before proving dying declaration by B, A must prove B's death. Whenever it is necessary to prove any fact in order to render evidence of any other fact admissible, the burden of proving that fact is on the person who wants to give such evidence. In the given illustration, a dying declaration of deceased is to be proved, but before that, death of victim is to be established or proved. According to section 105, when a person is accused of any offense, the burden of proving the existence of circumstances bringing the case within any of the general exceptions in the Indian Penal Code or within any special exception or proviso contained in any other part of the same code or in any law defining the offense is upon him, and the court shall presume the absence of such circumstances. This section is applicable to criminal cases. An accused is presumed to be innocent till his guilt is proved, and burden lies on the prosecution to prove his guilt. But when accused raise the benefit of exceptions, burden lies on him to prove exception. For example, here A accused of murder alleged that by grave and sudden provocation he was deprived of the power of self-control. The burden of proof here is on A that he has to prove that while committing the murder, he committed the murder when he is deprived of his self-control and by grave and sudden provocation. That's why his case falls within the general exceptions of IPC. Section 106 of Indian Evidence Act provides that when any fact is especially within the knowledge of any person, the burden of proving that fact is upon him. For example, A is charged with traveling on a railway without a ticket. The burden of proving that he had a ticket is on him. This section lays down the principle that where a fact is specially within the knowledge of a party, the burden of proving that fact lies upon him. Section 107 provides that when the question is whether a man is alive or dead and it is shown that he was alive within 30 years, the burden of proving that he is dead is on the person who affirms it. This section is based on the principle of the continuity of the things. Once a state of things is shown to exist, the law presumes that it continues to exist for a period for which such state of things ordinarily lasts. This principle also applies to continuity of the life at least for 30 years. Section 108 provides that when the question is whether a man is alive or dead, and if it is proved that he has not been heard of for 7 years by those who would naturally have heard of him if he had been alive, the burden of proving that he is alive is shifted to the person who affirms it. Section 109 provides that when the question is whether persons are partners or landlord and tenant or principal and agent, and it has been shown that they have been acting as such, the burden of proving that they do not stand or have ceased to stand to each other in those relationships respectively is on the person who affirms it. Section 109 lays down the principle dealing with the presumption of the continuity of relationship between persons or a state of things. When person acted as partners or as landlord and tenant or as principal and agent, the burden of proving that such relationship does not exist lies on the person who affirms it. According to this section, when a person stands a relationship of partners of a firm or landlord and tenant or principal and agent, it is presumed that such relationship continues unless the contrary is proved. According to section 110, when the question is whether any person is owner of anything of which he is shown to be in possession, the burden of proving that he is not the owner is on the person who affirms that he is not the owner. This section gives weight to the principle that possession is prima facie evidence of complete title. Anyone who intends to remove the possessor must establish a right to do so. According to this section, when a person is shown to be in possession of any property, the presumption is that he is the owner of that property. If anybody denies his ownership, burden lies on him to prove that he is not the owner of the property. According to section 111, where there is a question as to the good faith of a transaction between parties, one of whom stands to the other in a position of active confidence, the burden of proving the good faith of the transaction is on the party who is in a position of active confidence. This section imposes a duty of good faith upon the person occupying the position of trust and confidence. The law requires that the party enjoying confidence must act in good faith towards the other, and the burden lie upon him to prove that he did act in a good faith. The active confidence means and indicates the relationship between the parties must be such that one is bound to protect the interest of other. Section 112 of the Indian Evidence Act provides that the fact that any person was born during the continuance of a valid marriage between his mother and any man, or within 280 days after its dissolution, the mother remaining unmarried, shall be conclusive proof that he is the legitimate son of that man, unless it can be shown that the parties to the marriage has no access to each other at any time when he could have been begotten. This section is based on English rule that the child born in wedlock should be treated as the child of the man who was then the husband of the mother. The effect of the provision 112 is that a child born to a married parents is conclusively presumed to be their child. The same effect presumption arises where the marriage was dissolved and the child was born within 280 days after the dissolution, the mother remaining unmarried in the meantime. The spirit behind section 112 is that once valid marriage is proved, there is strong presumption about the legitimacy of children born during wedlock. When the above requirements are satisfied, the presumption of legitimacy is a conclusive presumption of law. According to section 113A, when the question is whether the commission of suicide by a woman had been abated by her husband or any relative of her husband, and it is shown that she had committed suicide within a period of 7 years from the date of her marriage, and that her husband or such relative of her husband had subjected her to cruelty, the court may presume, having regard to all the other circumstances of the case, that such suicide had been abated by her husband or by such relative of her husband. For the purpose of this section, cruelty shall have the same meaning as in section 498A of the Indian Penal Code. Many cases have come to the knowledge in past where newly married women commit suicide or has been burnt by her husband and in-laws. In the absence of sufficient proof, it was very difficult for the prosecution to prove that it was not a suicidal case, or if it was, then it was the result of the abatement by husband or in-laws. Under this section, presumption is raised against accused if the conditions laid in the provision is fulfilled. According to section 113b, when the question is whether a person has committed the dowry death of a woman and it is shown that soon before her death such woman has been subjected by such person to cruelty or harassment for or in connection with any demand for dowry, the court shall presume that such person had caused the dowry death. For the purpose of this section, dowry death shall have the same meaning as in section 304b of the Indian Penal Code. Dowry death is defined in section 304 IPC. It covers a kind of death which is not natural, occurring within 7 years of marriage, and it is shown that soon before her death she was subjected to cruelty or harassment by her husband or any relative of her husband for or in connection with any demand for dowry. Such death shall be called as dowry death, and such husband or relative shall be deemed to have caused her death. Section 113b uses the word shall and not may. So, it is a presumption of law. On proof of the essential mentioned in this section, it becomes obligatory on the court to raise a presumption that the accused caused the dowry death. The court has no discretion to draw the presumption under this section. If the essential ingredients are proved, then they are bound to draw this presumption under section 113b of the Indian Evidence Act. According to section 114 of the Indian Evidence Act, court may presume existence of certain facts. The court may presume the existence of any fact which it thinks likely to have happened, regard being had to the common course of natural events, human conduct, and public and private business in their relation to the facts of the particular case. Section 14 authorizes the court to make certain presumption which may naturally arise. For example, the court may presume that a man who is in possession of stolen goods soon after the theft is either the thief or has received the goods knowing them to be stolen unless he can account for his possession. By this, we come to the end of this topic. Thank you.